Hi, and thank you for listening to Dream 10X Radio, where we interview people attempting to live extraordinary lives. Our twofold purpose is to both direct and inspire people bold enough to do the same. Dream 10X. Face your fears and make your life count. Hey, welcome to Dream 10X episode 59. It's your boy JC.
And I'm Dr. Capel.
And go ahead.
I'm the random guy on the corner of the table, Brooks Willett. Here as a special guest. Super happy to be here with the Capels this evening.
Yeah, he's my cousin, and he's in town for the week, and we roped him into being on our podcast, so we're very excited to have you with us. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we thought we'd let you tell us a little bit about what your adventure is this week.
Sure.
That you're undertaking.
Absolutely, yeah. So it just happened to work out. I love biking. I love endurance sports, and the Capels and I, we'd explored several different crazy ideas in the past. James and I, way back when, we tried to get on the Amazing Race together. That didn't work out. Dr. Capel, JC,
Amazing. Yeah, that's right. Long
time ago. Too long ago. Too long ago. We tried to get on Eco Challenge Patagonia a couple years ago,
and then they canceled the show.
Yeah, they knew we were going to dominate, so they're just like, "Well, we can't even have a show." So I did a 2-day bike packing trip with a friend out in Washington State when I lived out in Seattle, and it was terrible and it was great all at the same time. I was telling Cindy earlier that on day 2, with about 10 miles to go to our truck in the middle of an Army training center, I slashed my tire, busted my inner tube, and so we ended up putting my tire back together with all the patches I had in my kit, put my spare tube in, and then gingerly and quickly rode as fast as we could back to the truck so I would still have a rear tire. Survived the trip, we made it back, and I apparently want to do more. And so now, rather than just like a 180-mile trip, I'm up here going to do the C&O Canal Towpath Trail to the Gap Greater Allegheny Passage Trail. It'll be about 350 miles from here to Pittsburgh. Going to do it over 3 days. And so this is, in my world, I would love to ride all the way across the country. So probably not quite there yet. So doing it, in terms of just time and commitments with family and work. But, this is worked with a family. This is kind of a birthday present to myself, where I get to
me too.
To you as well. Get to go do this for the next week. And yeah, super excited, super looking forward to that. And hopefully many more adventures to come.
That's awesome. So that's sorry. You have something? I don't want to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I always get chastised off camera for cutting her off, so
Sure.
I don't want to do that.
So I love how one of the things we talk about in Dream 10X is building in adventures into your life, your daily life, and how do you get off work and how do you get the time. So I love that you built this really epic micro adventure into your whole system. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and even really about 4 years ago, I was basically presented with a job opportunity to go work for AWS out in Seattle. So all opinions are my own. I'm a senior software development manager with AWS. But about 4 years ago, a recruiter called me up and was like, "Hey, do you want to come work for AWS? Do you want to move across the country?" I had been to Seattle before when I was super, super little, super young, so I didn't know a ton about the city. But basically, it reached a point in my life where I knew, there's several things I wanted more of. I wanted more outside time. I wanted more exercise. I wanted to try to reduce my carbon footprint. And so all these things were kind of in the back of my mind of like, on one hand, like professionally, like working for AWS, like, yeah, that'd be really cool. And then as I was talking to people about, like, I accepted the offer and we moved out, the kind of joke was, well, I'm moving across the country so I can bike to work every day. And so, for about a year and a half pre-pandemic, I was doing 100 miles a week, 10 miles each way, 5 days a week. And like that was, the fitting the adventure in. And like that was the most I'd ever really been able to cycle consistently in my life. We were a one-car family, which, my wife and I had been when we were early in our marriage. We'd been a one-car family, and that was super, in a weird way, exciting for us. And then to be able to do that again now with 2 and then 3 kids, it was just, it was super cool. And fitting it in and kind of building that just as part of your life rather than this sort of bolt on. And so, now it's mostly working from home. And so then there are different ways of how do you kind of fit that adventure and how do you scratch some of those itches that you may have for adventure.
Yeah, it's hard, but I'm pleased to see that you're doing it. We figured out a way, some fashion as well. I was inspired to hear that you were doing this, and I'm trying to get my head around like 350 miles in 3 days. And you're going to be camping along the way. And you're going to end up in Pittsburgh, and then you're going to take the train back. That's right. Awesome. That's I hope you live. And
Me too. I hope I see you on the other side of this trip, like here in this world, in this life. Yeah, I mean, I think there's certain bits of sort of safety built in, so it's a pretty well established path. It's not in the middle of nowhere. There's shops along the way, so it's trying to take those sort of calculated risks, and it's isolated from vehicular traffic, so you don't have to worry about people on their phones hitting you while you're riding your bike. And so that certainly is a huge draw, and it's also even like for the family, like, okay, we're going to support you through this again because they want to see me on the other side as well. Yeah. But yeah, I mean the physical aspect of it, and like the logistics of like what do you need to survive for 350 miles in 3 days? So I had to make choices. Like I have a camp stove I love. But I left it behind, because it's one of those trips of like I don't have enough space. Like I need to take a filter. Like in terms of priorities, like I need to be able to filter water if I need it.
Are you going to drink from a stream using the filter?
Potentially,
what do you have? Is it a Life Straw or something?
No, it's a Katadyn. I don't know the particular brand, but it's one of the higher ends, high volume.
It's a Swiss company that makes really high end water filters.
But then we're close enough to. I'll be close enough to civilization where I plan to eat most of my meals. I did pack some protein bars and energy bars to help get me along the way. I have some electrolyte powder to be able to add in. So trying to kind of make those trade-offs of like what do you need. I had hoped the weather was going to be nicer, so live in South Carolina now, and I'd actually hoped to not have to bring a whole sleeping bag. Was just going to bring like a sheet that would be enough, and it was like it's getting in the 40s. Like I'm bringing a sleeping bag. I'm not dealing with being cold at the end of a long day of riding.
Yeah. So getting all of that kit on your bike was a challenge as well, but you seem to have done a great job of doing that. I was really impressed.
Yeah, and then the logistics of like, hey, I'm going to be on a 7.5-8 hour train ride from Pittsburgh back to DC. It's 100% full at this point. It's like as much as I love biking, the train is full. Like people probably wouldn't love it as much if like, hey, I've been 3 days on the trail. I haven't showered. I'm still wearing my bicycle kit.
That's the good way to get all the seating cleared out.
Yeah, so I'm gonna get a hotel. Even though it's an early morning train, I'm gonna get a hotel. I'm gonna get showered. And so part of that like precious space is I have a clean set of clothes, because it's like one of those things of like, this is my choice, this is something I want to do. And so I don't need to necessarily put that on everybody else on this train. Like, hey, you're going to do this with me. It's like, no, like as much as I can, like, I'm sure I'm not going to look great at that point in my life. And so, they're still going to have to deal with this scraggly dude and like his random knapsack of bags and bags that he's carrying. But yeah, it should be good.
Cool, and I was inspired by that. I'm also inspired to hear. I've never heard your desire to like sail around the world, so that was good to hear. Like, other people in our family don't talk about crazy stuff like that.
I know. Well, and I think this is part of their. Other than we talk about kind of in family settings. I'm a little bit younger than James, and so there's a certain aspect. I know it's hard to believe.
It's hard to tell. Really hard to tell.
But and even now, like if you wanted to,
the opposite, but
you could still probably pummel me if you really, really wanted to. But there's a certain sort of connection we have in terms of like sharing these big ideas and these big crazy dreams, and so whether it's cycling across the U.S. or doing some long distance through hiking, sailing around the world, that certainly is on the list of. Being able to, and like honestly, this is the sort of weird world I live in. Like one of the hardest things for me about thinking about sailing around the world is like, where am I going to put my bikes? I'm going to get to all these great ports of call, and I'm going to want to be able to ride my bike around. And it's like so that's almost one of the that's one of the criteria. Like whatever boat I get, I've got to be even if it's just a foldable bike. I have to have room to be able to take a foldable bike, so I can then go explore all the cities and things. But yeah, I mean it's something. I think I had a great aunt just recently passed away, lived in Santa Cruz, and I think she was probably really my first introduction to sailing on the Monterey Bay. She didn't sail; she was too old. But one of the things she really wanted us to experience was going on this kind of charter sunset cruise in the Monterey Bay, and it was just like, this is amazing. This is so great. And so at least one other time we've been back to Santa Cruz. Actually took my brother and his family, so that our two families got together and we chartered a boat. So it was just the captain and our two families on a smaller boat, and that was super, super cool. Like, I think they really experienced kind of the joy of being out there and being close to water and sea life. My wife and I, we've done, when we were down in the Keys on a camping trip, we went on a group sort of charter. One of the presents, speaking of birthday presents to myself, highly kind of biased obviously towards experience at this point in my life, when we moved out to Seattle, was a coworker found out I would like to sail, and he's like, oh, the sailing club is offering this really great deal on ASA 101 sailing, so you can become a crew member. And so that was my birthday present to myself.
Nice.
The first year out in Seattle was
cool.
ASA 101. And so, there are a couple other times to get to sail with him, this coworker, as well as this other sort of sailing opportunities in Seattle. And I think it's just continued to grow. There's obviously a lot of logistics I haven't figured out for what that would look like, but I think in terms of sort of maybe big, crazy big life goals, sailing around the world would be one. And even now kind of mentally preparing that list of like, okay, where are the ports I'd want to go? Even trying to explain it to the family of like, okay, this is why it's okay. Like, here are the islands you can stop at across the Atlantic. Here's the route across the Pacific. Here's where you refuel or, restock all your supplies. So we'll see. Maybe one day we'll all crew a sailboat.
Yeah.
Don't need some adventure reality show.
I'm
just
down.
do it ourselves.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
We don't need to be on TV, but
That's right.
But hey, if you want me to be on TV, one of the cool things I really enjoy about these big, planning these big adventures is trying to figure out all the steps that you need to go through to get it actually done, to execute it.
Yeah.
Even though it's really painful, it can be really painful at times, figuring out all the things you need to learn, all the logistics you need to take care of, and all that stuff. I like that challenge more and more. I like the big things that require a lot of logistical planning and learning and things like that. What are you laughing at?
Nothing.
Come on, you're smirking at me. Do you not think that's the case?
No, I think that's totally the case.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you were like, he doesn't know how to plan anything. I'm going to do his own planning around here.
Well, I mean, I think it's counterintuitive for a lot of folks of like, oh, you want the adrenaline, you want the endorphins. We talked a little bit about this of like controlling the things you control. So like before we started the camera, I was talking about like counting the milligrams of caffeine I was going to have. Like, on one hand, like there's a biological necessity for that, but on the other, it's like it's kind of irrelevant, but it's something I can control.
Yeah.
And so having that sort of sense of what are the things you control? What are the steps you need? How can you maximize your probability of success in whatever this endeavor is? And I think that's one of the best things for me about, like, what do I take away from this adventuring spirit is like, okay, how can I apply this to my life? Like, how can I maximize my probability of success in whatever this other thing is I'm going to do? And what's the planning I need to do to be able to make that happen?
Yeah, the planning. How do I take this big thing and break it down into small discrete steps that I can accomplish one by one to get to this big goal? Yeah. I think that's really interesting because if you can figure that out, if you get good at that, what can't you do?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, anyway, any other comments on adventures or things like that? No. Dreams? All right, well, what we actually are going to talk a little bit more about today is the Ben Horowitz book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Talking about big adventures and big goals. This actually has to do with building big businesses and how do you develop the skills, the leadership skills, the requisite leadership skills for building a big, scary business, and how do you get through all the problems associated with building a big, scary business. And so I had no experience with building a big, scary business. I've got a little tiny business right now I'm trying to grow, NautilusTracker.com, or Nautilus Tracker, NautilusTracker.com. And so I was really interested to hear about the career arc of Ben, Mr. Horowitz, author Ben Horowitz. I don't know how you refer to him.
The esteemed.
the esteemed Mr. Horowitz. And how he went from becoming just a regular technology guy to becoming the CEO of a large, fast-growing, publicly traded two companies, I think, Opsware and as well as LoudCloud. And so one of the reasons I thought it would be great to have you on the podcast is because you work for AWS, and Mr. Horowitz was the CEO of probably one of the first cloud companies in the world, LoudCloud, in the 90s. And so I thought that was there might be some good discussion there about cloud companies. Okay, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about who Horowitz is and how he got his kind of start, and then talk about some of the key takeaways that he offers in the second half of the book about how to be a great CEO and some of the leadership principles that he imparts in the book. So he starts out working for a company called Silicon Graphics, which I thought was pretty cool because I got my start as an early learning Unix system administration using SGI machines and learning IRIX a little bit. And I also worked on Sun Solaris kind of at the same time. And I thought, oh, wow, that's cool. He actually worked for SGI. And I'm not really sure what he did there, but he ended up working a lot of hours and discovered that, hey, I really need to spend more time with my family. And so he jumped ship there and went to work for, I think it was Lotus or some other company after that. And ironically, not too soon thereafter, he saw this neat, shiny thing called a web browser. And it was called Mosaic. Oh, and have you ever used Mosaic?
I have.
You have?
Yeah, way back in the day.
Have you? You probably have. You're too young. I used Mosaic, and I was blown away. I mean, he had that little dinosaur or lizard in the top right-hand corner with the shooting stars and stuff whenever you'd visit a new URL. And it was just so cool to see that and then see some like text and graphics appear. And back in the day, prior to that, all you had was like FTP clients and Telnet and non-visual tools for browsing the internet, Gopher and Archie, and those are really old tools. But so Mosaic was a really cool thing. It opened up the whole world really with this hypertext markup language and being able to browse computers all over the world, basically. So he went to go, and this was Netscape. The company Netscape was behind the browser that was being built. It was originally developed at the University of Illinois by Mark Andreessen, and he was now the 22-year-old CTO of Netscape, and Jim Barksdale was now the CEO, or not Barksdale, I keep saying. Jim Clark, I think, was the CEO of Netscape at the time. And so then apparently Mr. Horowitz starts working crazy hours again for this company that's going public and is trying to take over the world with this new internet technologies that it was developing. And he was ahead of the server group at the time. So they had a lot of the company was geared towards developing a new web browser for the world, but he was ahead of a group developing web server technology for the world. And again, one of my first jobs and how I learned a lot of doing hands-on server administration and web server administration was I was working with my mentor Blair Morton at the time. Thanks again, Blair. Taught me all he knew about Unix commands and stuff like that. And we were using a Netscape server at the time, and it was funny to hear that they had two server products. They had an insecure version that they sold for a lesser price, and then a secure version using secure socket layers and all that they sold for more expensive. I just thought that was interesting, given how insecure everything was at the time, and how not a lot of attention was given to security, kind of much like it is today, but a little bit more concern given to that today. So they went on, and the company grew like crazy. And I have a link in the blog about the web browser group and how Microsoft started coming at them with their bundling of the Internet Explorer with Windows 95 and just trying to take them out of the market. And so one way that Netscape tried to counter that was by releasing the Mosaic or Mozilla source code as open source, and in the hopes that they would get a large community of people working on that code base creating an even better web browser than what Microsoft was throwing at them. And so this video is really interesting. It follows all the Netscape developers around. They're like working 24/7, 365, like trying to compete with Microsoft and to help make that company successful. And I was just exhausted just watching them because they literally were just like working around the clock trying to get the code base in good shape and to the point where they would feel okay releasing it. And they had a hard deadline from when they had to push it out too. And so they were just like flogging everybody. Anyway,
that was
kind of
cloud
scary.
distribution. Like they were shipping media, so this was a real hard deadline that they couldn't miss.
Could not miss it. And it was intense. It seemed like it was pretty intense, but it was really cool to see how they were doing the baking there behind the scenes. Kind of enjoyed that. So Microsoft came at them hard. They released a source code to kind of counteract the threat, and the company was doing okay, but Microsoft was just pounding them. And when Microsoft comes at you, it's hard to beat a company like that. So they ended up selling the company to AOL, which I thought was also interesting for a couple reasons. One, because it's AOL and it's in Virginia. Like, it's not a Silicon Valley company. So here this high-tech Silicon Valley company is selling to a media company in Virginia. That's really ironic.
Yeah.
Yet they're still very proud about being the Silicon Valley, Anyway, and then the other thing is it's a content company versus a technology company. And the technology company was the one that was making all the money. So I just wonder what that says about the market and how people perceive the market. Mm-hmm. Even though the technology that came out of Netscape was awesome, like the web browser, awesome. The web servers were awesome. Cookies were invented there. JavaScript was invented there. LDAP came out, the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. So many cool things came out of Netscape. It was such a great technology company, yet the kind of the dumber content company in Virginia is the one.
Yeah, I mean,
cool.
To a certain extent, like they had the purse, they had the resources, they could continue to fund. Mm-hmm. It gave them a little bit of a niche in terms of kind of their own branding of like, oh, well, obviously we're a technology company. Look, we just bought Netscape. I think there's several things there that are kind of interesting as you think about the history of technology and innovation and how technology continues living on. And I think this is one of the things that you'll hear a lot in some of the tech startups of, what is the technology itself is almost the vision. And so then if there's a way, whether it's through open sourcing your code or through being acquired by a company that shares the same vision, sometimes that is the exit strategy, is to see the technology continue to be able to grow and influence the world. Which, Ben definitely makes a point about, particularly around the LDAP and SSL, which is also a Netscape. So many of those core internet technologies really came out of this company, which is kind of phenomenal.
And all that lives today and is like the underpinning of so many core technologies that we use on the internet today. Okay, so AOL, so they stayed at Ben Horowitz and Mark Andreessen, they stayed at AOL for a time, and then they decided to go on and start another company after that, as they do. And they go on and form the first cloud company called LoudCloud. Mm-hmm. And I remember hearing about them back in the 90s, but I didn't think anything of them because I didn't know what cloud meant. And I think a lot of people had no idea what cloud meant at the time, and they were just so far ahead of their time, really. And so then now, at this point, Ben Horowitz is the CEO of LoudCloud, and I think Mark Andreessen is chief operating officer or something like that. And so I think at this point, so Ben has been working crazy at Netscape, and he goes to AOL, and now they decided to start another company, and is working crazy again at LoudCloud, trying to take this company public. And they've got a good start with the money because they made a lot of money off of their sale to AOL. They have personal capital that they're investing in the company. I think Andreessen invested something like $6 million, and then they got a bunch of money from other people as well.
Be a Viking. Get your Viking Rose hoodie, t-shirt, hat, or water bottle, and join the adventure. www.vikingrose.com.
Perkins, I believe, was also an investor in Loud Cloud. And with Kleiner Perkins, if you recall from our previous episode talking about the $1 trillion coach, came Bill Campbell, who was an awesome coach and helped protect the investments that Kleiner Perkins was making by helping the companies be successful. So one of the great things that Ben Horowitz benefited from as the CEO of Loud Cloud was the counsel of Coach Bill Campbell. And so he got to be led through the disaster that was the dot-com bust of 1990s by bouncing ideas off of Bill Campbell when that happened. So that, of course, made a really hard market for them to survive, and money was definitely tight, and it was hard to do sales at the time because nobody was buying. And they were able to get some subsequent investment rounds during that time, but then nobody was buying anything, so they ran out of money again, and it was just a constant struggle to keep the company alive. And then, of course, 9/11 happens, and then everything froze. And then what do we do now? We got no customers. There's no commerce. Everything's dead. How do I keep my company alive? And so he had to figure that out. From the highs of the company to the very lows, and had to go through all these situations of taking the company public, and then eventually selling to HP, and so that helped with one thing. But then, EDS, they sold to EDS first, and then took out some intellectual property. Were able to hang on to some intellectual property called Opsware from that sale, and worked out a deal with EDS where they licensed the software back to them, and for about $20 million or something like that. And then they ran into issues there because it turned out that EDS was like their core customer, and there was one guy inside of EDS who didn't like their software, their Opsware software that helped with the automation of deploying services, cloud services to hardware infrastructure. And this one guy didn't like that software, so he was about to kill the deal with was it Opsware? Mm-hmm. With Horowitz's Opsware company, which was a follow-on after Loud Cloud. And they worked fiercely to figure out who the guy was that didn't like their software, and then worked fiercely to figure out how they could possibly appease that guy. And they finally found the guy in Plano, Texas, and we're picking his brain, saying, asking, what can we do to make you happy? What can we do to keep this contract alive? Because EDS was basically their only customer after doing that deal, and they didn't want to die. And so they eventually figured out that this guy had a personal grudge against EDS because he felt like they were always stabbing him in the back. And by giving this new contract to Opsware, he was losing some key software that he loved that helped him do the inventory of the hardware he was in charge of. So they figured out that if they could just buy that company that created that inventory software, which was a lot cheaper than what they were getting from EDS to keep for their annual license,
what they would have lost,
what they would have lost. So they just bought the company and licensed it back to them for free, and then they were able to keep EDS happy. Which that was a really cool story, and how they were able to get to the core of what this one person was that was blocking their success there. And it had really nothing to do with their software for the most part. It had to do with this other software he was potentially losing.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. But so then after so many ups and downs with Loud Cloud and Opsware, they ended up having a successful exit with Opsware to HP. And the thing that was interesting to me there was that you've got two big kind of, HP wasn't so much of a government contractor, but I think EDS was a big government contractor, and so they were kind of the ones that helped keep their company alive there. And then HP, and then later on down the road, HP and EDS merged into one company. So I thought that was kind of intriguing. All right, so that was, and from there, so while all this is going on, there's the relationship building between Horowitz and Marc Andreessen, and they become good friends, and they, go together through building these companies, and both of them become, very wealthy at the end of the day through all of these ups and downs and all these struggles. And so the two of them, after all of this, I guess 8 years of different companies, form a venture capital company called Andreessen Horowitz, and so this is another thing. Their name is A16Z, the name of their venture capital company. And so for the first time, after seeing all of these types of naming conventions with the first letter and the last letter followed by the number, you know what that's called?
No. I mean,
but you know what they are. You know what it means.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I had no idea. I was like, wait, I need to figure out what that actually means. So I took a beat and did some searching around. Like, it's a thing called a pseudonym or something like that.
So Brett, explain it. What is it?
So yeah.
Well, it's just the number of letters between the N of Andreessen and the T of Horowitz. So there's
The Z,
16.
yeah.
Yeah, there's 16 letters in between the A and the Z.
Yeah.
And so, if you count them all up, it's A, 16 letters, and then the Z.
Yeah.
I can't remember if he explained it in this book or one of his other books, where the name A16Z came from. It may have been one of his other
It came
books.
from DEC way back in the day, because one of the engineers of email had too long of a name that wouldn't fit in their email address space then.
Yeah.
So that's when they shortened his name, and then that's how that whole thing
right.
got started. So it's been around for a long time, and apparently a lot of software engineer people are very familiar with that. In fact, I've known the K8S for Kubernetes. Mm-hmm. I just didn't know why it was called. It's embarrassing to admit that you use these terms, but you don't know where they came from or what they are. But so I finally just sat down and did a quick search to figure out.
So would you be JC5?
J5E.
J5E. Okay.
Or not 5, but 1, 2, 3,
7.
4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, J7E.
J7E. Okay.
Yeah.
Wait.
It was really the only point of that was to shorten a name so you could get the email to work.
Yeah.
That was
Interesting.
J8s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got, what was it for internationalization? It was I18N, and localization L10N or whatever. I just had no idea what the origin of that was, so it was just kind of embarrassing. But I'm admitting it. I'm embarrassed by that. I didn't know it. I just learned it.
Brooks knew it.
I don't know if I knew it before the books, but yeah. I mean, some of those I was familiar with. Maybe not as a broader pattern.
Yeah.
So Andreessen Horowitz, venture capital. They're pumping money into tech companies, and making a lot of money there. So they're both, I think, worth in the billions. So good for them. So in closing, I just wanted to pull out some of the leadership lessons from the back of the book, and hopefully try to take those to heart, just like I learned what A16Z means. Okay, so number 1, he mentions the use of lead bullets against your competition. And I thought that was an interesting way of putting it, because they wanted a silver bullet to put Microsoft out of the game, to kill them. But the discussion internally was, well, there is no silver bullet. We can't kill these guys. It's going to take a bunch of lead bullets. We're just going to have to outperform them on a product per product basis and price by price basis. I'm just going to have to hit them head to head in order to win at the game that they were playing against the competition. So I thought that was interesting. Head to head competition using lead bullets, I guess. Number 2 was the relationship with Bill Campbell. So he comes up again in another company, and I just really loved how Kleiner Perkins pulled him in as like their silver bullet. He really was their silver bullet. Whenever they invested in a company, you're like, hey, with that investment, you're going to get our Navy SEAL, our Special Forces business guy to help you return a profit from our investment. And that was Bill Campbell. So number 3, the importance of training employees, and I thought you would like this. He's a big believer in training employees, and he made the statement that McDonald's trains their employees. Why wouldn't high-tech companies train their skilled employees?
So, Brooks, I'm curious from your perspective with that question, like how do you make sure your employees get the development they need in directions that they want to go, as well as that are going to help the company?
Yeah, that aspect of desire is super, super important. I was relating to somebody today at work. Like there's early in my tenure with my current company, there was an engineer, super, super talented. I was like, oh, this is going to be a great opportunity for you. It's going to stretch. It's going to give you opportunity to demonstrate contribution in multiple different areas. And he's like, I'm not interested in this. Peace out. I'm done. And it was super hard because it was like, as a manager, like I was trying to invest.
Yeah.
I was trying to pave the way for this engineer to just rise to other levels, but it wasn't a direction he wanted to go in. And so he's just like, I'm going to find somewhere else where I can go in the direction I want. And so it really is, there's I don't know that as much as I like to have precise calculations for everything, this is one of those areas in my life where I'm like, I don't have a precise calculation. It's much more jazzy. It's much more fluid in terms of trying to figure out the direction they want to go in, understanding that that's not set in stone. Just because they said something once doesn't mean that's going to be the same thing that they feel tomorrow or next year. And so you need to keep checking in with them and seeing like, okay, where are you today? What opportunities do we need to be preparing you for? And then giving them enough, and I think this is maybe even one of the hardest things as a manager, how do you give your people enough opportunity to be stretched where they can assess for themselves, oh wow, I have a gap here I need to fill, but not stretch so far that they just break and they're just like, I can't do this, I give up. And so that making sure they have the support, they have the framework, knowing when you need to kind of bring back a goal. Like if a goal is too big, like, okay, like, all right, let's try to find something that's more reasonable. But that always is kind of aligned with where they are and understanding that their direction may change. So again, not that that's a precise answer, but that's kind of the framework that I follow as I'm working with my teams.
So do you go out and intentionally look for opportunities for your teammates?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, so now that I have several managers reporting to me, I mean, one of the things I'll talk about with them is like, listen, like there are two aspects for our planning process. So one is absolutely like, in the Amazon framework, always working backwards from our customers. We talk a lot about that. Like, we want to be the Earth's most customer-obsessed, customer-centric company. So like the customer is everything for us. So we got to work backwards from them, make sure we're meeting their needs. But then the other aspect is like as a people manager, our engineers are our customers. Like we have to have that mindset of what are their needs, what are the things they need, and so then there becomes this real balance of how do you obsess over your external customers, how do you take care of your internal customers, but how do you also grow your people, and how do you align the opportunities within that sort of framework of the upcoming features or projects that you have to help them each grow where they are.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's very hard to do, I think. And it definitely takes a lot of time and really getting to know those people and then knowing the organization and finding those opportunities. Like I found as a manager, it's sometimes really hard to find those opportunities. And so fortunately, like we just go externally when we need to. But yeah, it's I love that you're doing that.
Absolutely.
Wow, I like that. You guys, I love how you're focused on people. It's interesting.
That's why we're supervisors.
It's why you're super people. I did want to point out that I thought there was a little bit of a hypocritical statement later on in the book about training where he says, my executives, I expect to have what they need to hit the ground running. I don't have time to train my executives.
Well, so that, like, from what I do for a living, we need to be training our people from the first day they come in the door, and that never happens. It's always, we need to focus on supervisors and executives. So by the time you get there, you don't know your ass from a tea kettle. And
get where? Up the chain to that level?
So we're going to promote you because you do your job really well, not because you're really good at with people or anything else. And then they're in an executive position, maybe because they wanted to promote them out of the way. Anyway, it happens a lot. And then they are in a leadership role. They have a team. It's falling apart. They don't know how to lead. So we need to start from the ground up. Whew, this
But why do
passion.
you think he says he doesn't have time? There's no time to train executives, only lower people up below managers.
I love the fact he's training his lower people. That's exactly what I'm saying. That he's trained them so much, from my perspective.
Oh, that
to be
once
able to
they
be in that
get to
leadership
that
role,
level, you
they
think
should have that
okay.
mindset and that self-awareness to know where their gaps are.
And I think there's a real difference between you bring somebody in as an engineer, you expect there's going to be a certain onboarding period, and typically, like, engineers are super critical. You know, they're all designing, implementing their particular components, but they have peers that are doing review processes. So there's a certain amount of checks and balances. Hopefully you have managers who are fostering really good team atmosphere where they're supporting and they're building one another up. If you bring in a manager or an executive in particular who now has maybe hundreds of people in their organization, they have the ability to seriously decrease the enjoyment of hundreds of people's lives.
Yes.
And so, like, I think that's where it's like, I don't have time for that. It's not like maybe I, CEO, don't have time for that, but like ultimately these are my people. So I cannot stand for you to come in as a terrible manager, as a terrible executive, and ruin my people's experience. So like I don't, there's sort of this, it is a little bit of a dichotomy, but again, I think it comes back to the people in terms of the, you know, sometimes we use the phrase blast radius. You know, the blast radius of a bad exec is way higher than the blast radius of a bad engineer.
Very true.
Got it. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Thank you. Cool. Number 4, the use of profanity in an organization should be tolerated to an extent. He talks about
My people.
He talks about at one point some of the people in the organization and the company were offended by the use of profanity and thought that he should make it a law that no profanity in the organization. However, especially in engineering companies and software engineering companies, profanity is usually, you know, the status quo, and it's a means of catharsis. And when you talk to a machine, that's the only way you can get a machine to to cuss at it, right? So.
Well, and he has some good points. Like, there's nuance that he adds in the book of, like, it's not to be used to abuse. It's not to be used to make somebody feel unsafe. Like, any of that is like zero tolerance. Like, that's not okay.
Right.
If it's a question of manners or like what's proper language, I think that's where he was really like, I mean, what is proper language?
Right.
And I think this is where, I don't know if you're going to talk about hip hop at all.
No, I wasn't gonna.
And I think there's this broader sort of influence of where, you know, particularly outside of certain cultural segments, like, using 4-letter words isn't seen as problematic.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a lot of, you know, if my brother were here, he could talk to you about verbal bleaching and a lot of other things, you know, that kind of go into this concept of like changing or stripping the meaning of words to, you know, partly as coping mechanism and partly just like, this is what you know. And so I think kind of understanding that it's maybe bigger than just like what's prim and proper, and particularly in the engineering sense of, you know, we see that a lot, we hear that a lot of like, you have to be willing to break some things. And, you know, we use this phrase, you know, either fail fast or fail safe. You know, like, that has to be a part of an engineer's mindset of how do you break things, but do it in a safe way, because that's the way that you really find that edge. You know, even like in performance testing, like, performance testing is a fancy way of saying, I'm going to break this thing, and I just want to know when it breaks and how it breaks and where the fracture lines are, so I can go figure it out and fix it and then break it again. And so I think this is, you know, maybe an extension of that, just in the linguistic sense.
Yep.
That's fun. I want to break stuff.
In a safe way.
In a safe way. Well, I love that too, because like in the Navy, if you didn't use profanity, nobody would even listen to you. That's really how we communicated. And so I appreciate that cultural aspect, that it's some people, that's just how they operate. And when you put them in a totally different culture and setting, it's really hard for them to be able to feel included. So yeah, it's...
And every company is different, you know, like I've seen several different cultures in terms of organizations I've worked for, in terms of what is tolerated, you know, which 4-letter words are okay, which ones are not, how many times you can say it in a particular, like, you know, like maybe the first time you know, drop something, it's okay, but then by the third time somebody's going to be like, all right, you know, slow it down. You know, you need to find another word, like expand your vocabulary. But so yeah, just understanding your audience and like
Yeah.
to your point of the Navy, like know your audience, know what's going to communicate that message, and then be willing to make a safe place where people can communicate themselves and be heard.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about Bill Campbell is that he would drop the F-bomb all the time. Like he was a football coach at heart and just would tell it like it is and cuss at you or whatever to get his point across.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a quote in the book of in one of those early days, I think it was with Netscape, if I'm not mistaken, where Bill Campbell's coming in and he's like, "It's not about the money, Ben," and Ben takes a sigh of relief. He's like, "Phew." And then Bill says, "It's about the effing money."
Yeah.
And it's like, oh.
Yeah, it's whether he should take the company public. I think it's
Right.
LoudCloud. Whether he
Yeah,
should
yeah,
take
LoudCloud.
Yeah,
public. So it's not about the money.
Which we should
Okay.
talk about cash flow at some point if you're not going to do that, but we'll come back to that.
Okay, I won't. You bring that up.
All right.
So profanity. Hey, I got a lot of good discussion. Number 5, the importance of one-on-ones. And so he was big on one-on-ones, and you all do one-on-ones, and so it's big in your companies as well,
Yeah.
I assume. And I think one-on-ones is important because it facilitates the vertical flow of information up to the top. Otherwise, how are the people at the top going to know what's going on really at the bottom, unless that information gets bubbled up through one-on-ones? What else?
Well, there's
Why
got to be
else
that
would it be?
foundation of trust, too, to build trust with your teammates. Because if you don't have trust, then nothing is going to happen. So I think that's a huge part of it, just getting to know them as a human. And then when things are off, so for example, one of my teammates, who I love to death, he's fabulous. When he doesn't talk, something is wildly wrong. So
That sounds like me.
The quiet one. When he gets quiet, then be concerned.
yes, exactly. So, like, just getting to know those relationships. And so, all right, when do I need to step in and say, all right, how can I help you? Or if something's, like, really off and their projects aren't going well, being able to have that trust foundation to have those conversations saying, all right, is something going on outside of work that we need to be aware of so I can give you some space to go figure yourself out. So, yeah, I think there's a lot, like, with one-on-ones. It's not just, so, all right, give me your list, give me your tasks. It's more building that relationship. So that's what I don't know, I'm assume you are similar.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting in the last company I was at before coming, now, I held one-on-ones because I was like, oh yeah, this is super important. It was kind of against the culture of the company I was at. Like, it was pretty wild. Like, it was this like really rebellious thing, and it was 15 minutes every other week. Like that was as much as I felt like I could kind of like, all right, I think I can do it this much and not really ruffle anyone's feathers too much. But some of it, like we talked about, like understanding where engineers want to go, like how are you going to know that if you're not having these conversations? How are you going to know what opportunities they need if you're not listening to them? And so, yeah, on one hand, you could say, and maybe this is kind of my heart as a manager, like I don't care about the execs, like they need to figure their own mechanisms out of getting in touch with the people. But it's also for your employees, like they need. And we use the term FaceTime with the boss.
Yeah.
Like that's one of the potentially the highlights of an employee's week of like, hey, I have my one-on-one with the boss today.
It's true.
And even like as a manager or a senior manager now, like I still have that feeling like, okay, today is my day for my one-on-one with my supervisor, or today is my day for my skip level one-on-one, which happens even less frequently. And so there's that aspect of one, for the supervisor to know, but there's also that opportunity to listen, and I think it goes both ways. And I think that's, one of the things that can make them really effective. And there are great ways of making sure that culture, like the cultural messages are getting across, particularly as you're raising up leaders. Those are some safer spots to, whether it's kind of intimate, personal, private things that they maybe aren't going to share in a group setting, to the just making sure that everybody's kind of experience of, and I'll use that phrase a lot, like what is your experience of your job right now? Because like I want to hear that it sucks before you tell me you're quitting. Like if you've said, hey, I quit and I didn't realize you were having a bad time of it, that's on me. And I failed you as a manager.
So I'm hearing that it's not for the vertical flow of information, so that the people at the top can really have
There's
a better
other
feel
mechanisms for that.
Such as what?
So I will say it helps that, but
Yeah.
that shouldn't be a manager's primary concern.
Yes, 100%.
If your primary concern of I'm going to have one-on-one with my employees so I can feed the executives, you're a snitch. snitches get stitches. Like, you know, like, that's not going to work out well for you long term.
Yeah.
You know, like, you need to be in touch with your people. You know, you need to be understanding your people and what they need. And then, yes, you will filter and you'll pass some of that up. But that has to be a secondary benefit and a secondary priority in your mind, to the first of caring for your people, understanding your people.
Are you transparent with the people that you have one-on-ones with about that?
I don't know that I've used that
How do you build
phrase.
that trust with?
So some of it is being a little bit, being vulnerable, like being professionally appropriately vulnerable in terms of even like my own experience of, I'll talk about like, hey, here are things that are hard for me about my job. You know, the military phrase, gripes go up. You know, so there's a certain bit of like, I've kind of indoctrinated that into my own way of like, I don't want to just complain about like the org around me or about some executive, but you know, there's certain things that, you know, are going on where it's obvious to my team that like, you're off, like what's going on with you? You know, like they know me well enough. And so like, if I'm like, oh, everything's fine, then they put the BS card and they shut down and they're like, okay, he's not real. I can't trust him.
Yep.
And so like, I have to be able to find that way to be like, all right, here's what's going on. Here's, you know, what's the appropriate version, and not to like sanitize, not to lie, but what's useful, you know, because again, we talked about like control the things you can control. Like even if as a manager, there are things I can't control, I certainly don't need to put that on my employees.
Yeah.
Like that's cruel. But I can let them know like, hey, here's the broader perspective. Here's where we're going. Here's the strategy, the direction. And I think those are the things that ultimately, and I'll talk about my family. You know, one of the things we did pretty early in pandemic, we had a meeting on Friday mornings. We called it coffee, tea, breakfast, etc. And basically it's like, talk about whatever you want, just not work. You know, and it was 9:15, so it's not super early in the day. So it was like, oh man, I gotta get out of bed on a Friday. But it was also earlier before like we fully kind of ramped up. It was only a half hour. It wasn't a super big time commitment, and it immediately sort of, we did like force you to join a separate meeting, so it wasn't like it immediately rolled into our daily stand-up, but it was temporarily before it. And so like that was one of the things where like you got to hear a lot about what people were interested in, what they were doing on the weekend, you know, and so we really were able to sort of connect over some of those other things. And so then it wasn't weird. It's like, well, yeah, I know so-and-so has a son or a daughter. I know so-and-so is dating somebody on the other side of the country. I know so-and-so is getting ready to get married, and maybe they're, you know, lots of other things. And so some of those things just kind of work themselves out and become part of the fabric of the team. And you can, you know, treat those with respect and dignity. And then, you know, that's where in those moments where there is that sort of like, all right, we really need to talk about this because I need some help. It's a lot easier to get there because you already have the background, you know, whereas like, you know, they don't know, you know, my spouse is sick. They don't know my significant other is sick. They don't know I have a significant other. You know, like how now when there is this crisis, do I give them all the backstory to get them to the point where they can help? Where if you've already done the groundwork and the foundation, then it's just like, okay, yeah, here's the thing. I need help, and it's a lot easier to get there.
That's really good. Yeah. That's really good to hear. We could probably talk more about one-on-ones, but
yeah.
That was good. Number 6, the most difficult CEO skill in mastering is psychology.
Cognitive neuroscience.
Take it away.
Behavior. Good God.
Take it away, Dr.
Today.
Controlling that amygdala hijack.
Controlling the amygdala hijack. Yeah, knowing when to say.
Controlling your
say
fear. Controlling your
all of this.
All that stuff.
And then understanding that in others, like having that empathetic communication, where one, self-empathy, you understand what you're experiencing and why. Okay, so you're driving down. This is my favorite example that Chrissy uses. You're driving down the road. You have your family in the car. Some asshat cuts you off, and you're about to run into the car next to you to avoid him. You're like, you, ragey, right? So why are you having this reaction? Right? So your amygdala is hijacked. You're in full fight or flight mode, and but what's the need behind it? What need was not met? And so it could be you have a need for safety because you have your family in the car, and they just threatened your safety. It could be you have a need for order, and order and consistency, and they just totally broke the rule of order and consistency, and that put you in a fight or flight. So it's challenging your brain, but understanding that need and being able to get out of your amygdala back in your prefrontal cortex before you had the fuck you motherfucker reaction in a work setting is huge. And then understanding that in others and having that empathetic communication in others, understanding what they're experiencing, just like Brooke said, and what they're needing, and being able to talk about that in a way where they feel heard can totally change a context conversation. And as a CEO, 100%. And psychology, the brain is so fascinating. And humans, as Brooke said earlier, not everyone is the same. And how we operate can change from a day-to-day basis. And so just being able to be a human-centered person can wildly change an organization, because I worked for leaders who are, and I've worked for leaders who aren't, and there is a huge context difference. So,
Absolutely.
Is there a quick thing that you can say to practice controlling that shot from your amygdala when something like that happens to you, and controlling your response to that?
So typically,
because it's overwhelming.
Yeah, typically it's your body is in fight or flight before your brain realizes it's happening. So it's really physiologically understanding those key factors. Like, all right, so when you're in amygdala hijacked, what typically happens to you?
I bubble up from my gut really quick, and I lash out verbally.
Okay, so you feel it in your gut first. Does your heart race at all?
It's too fast.
It's too fast. Okay.
It's a burning here and a burning here, and it comes out my mouth.
So you have burning, right?
Yeah, that's the way it feels, like it's a burning.
So as soon as you feel it in your gut, recognizing that and asking yourself a question, saying, all right, I'm recognizing I'm about to get into amygdala hijack.
But you need to practice that.
Oh,
how do
100%.
you practice that before you get in a live situation and offend somebody?
Mindfulness and intention. And really practicing, I shouldn't say this. I really shouldn't say this.
But
sometimes
how do you really trigger that? Like, that's the thing.
Do you want me to start triggering?
I guess it's a rhetorical question.
No,
how do you really trigger that?
You have to get those neural pathways built before you're in an amygdala hijack.
Yeah.
So if you start practicing now in like safe situations, and sometimes it's conditioning. So for example, one of my teammates and I will have conversations, and she practices this with others. So she'll use triggering words to get me to that point where I'm starting to react, and I'm like, okay, stop. And then I get back control. So it's building that neural pathway and me learning how to control that reaction. And so this is a way that we practice in mindfulness in order to push ourselves to that limit. And then when we're on our own, okay, I've practiced this, and just like any other thing, just like practicing baseball or practicing rowing. So building those neural pathways, making them stronger.
And this reminds me of a discussion we had recently where you brand that training as mindfulness. But I think if you branded it differently about something about controlling that amygdala, the power of the amygdala has over our responses in a professional setting, some way. Because mindfulness sounds so ching-chingy, new agey kind of thing to me. Like, that's why when I hear that term, I don't really consider the seriousness of it. It's very important, and I think we all need to learn better to how we can become like Spock, in a professional setting, and not let the barbs that get thrown across us in a boardroom or in around a table, let that affect us. And it's hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I mean, I think Stephen Covey talks about it in his Habits of Highly Effective People, the interrupting, interrupting, that taking that pause. So, I mean, I think there are two things I was going to say. So one is, the role play. Like, role play is a great way of doing it. So I can remember as training to be an RA, I think before my junior year of college, they put us in these situations where basically you're supposed to go knock on the door, and then there's some sort of fight going on behind the door, and you just don't know what you're going to get into. And so, the first one, like, I remember, like, oh, it's fine. They're arguing about things. Like, I don't care. Like, I could care less about what they're arguing about. And then all of a sudden, one of them slams on pecan pie. And I was like, oh, no, you didn't. You did not just hate on pecan pie. Like, who are you to be hating on pecan pie? Like, I now am invested, and I care, and I'm going to throw down in the middle of this argument. And it was like, oh, wait, that's the point.
Yeah.
You know, like they were trying to find that thing, and like, how do I stop? How do I pause? So that's one of like role play, understand some of what your triggers are, and like also kind of keep a note of like, these are things that trigger me. You know, these are going to be some of the things that just set me off. And then so too, for, you know, the managers, the leaders, the supervisors, there's a really important aspect of this that we have to embody in our teams. Of it doesn't do James any good if he's worked on all his new age Spock mindfulness, interrupting himself. If he is in a team in an org that doesn't give him space to do that. So if he's in a meeting where James is working overdrive to stop the amygdala hijack, but then the conversation keeps going because people are talking over themselves and they're not giving room, and particularly now in hybrid settings or in virtual settings, you know, there aren't those clear ways. Like sometimes you feel like the only way is to like just throw down, and you know, so you're, as leaders, we've got to figure out ways to create organizations, to have mechanisms where people don't have to basically throw gasoline on their amygdala in order to be heard. And that's super, super hard of like, how do you do that? Like one, you're, you know, trying to do it for yourself of how do I stop my own sort of triggers? But then two, how do I create a safe place that allows lots of other folks from lots of different backgrounds with lots of different triggers to also speak in ways where they're controlling themselves. They have time to control themselves because like most people need a little bit of time to process, to slow down, and to respond.
Wow, good points. And that's what she does. That she's a big proponent of that.
Yeah, we built mindfulness, and we're building mindfulness into our culture, and already it's made a difference.
A good related quote that I noted in the book is, he says, "The only thing that prepares you to run a company is running a company."
Oh yeah.
That's kind of related to that, and I thought that was a good quote. Yeah. Okay, that's number 6. That we're running along here. The final one, number 7. There are 3 attributes of leadership every CEO should work on, and I really loved this. Number 1, the ability to articulate a vision, and in order to do that, you should emulate Steve Jobs. So Steve Jobs was really great at articulating a vision to shareholders and his company and to the world about the great products coming out of Apple. Number 2, have the right kind of ambition. And in order to do that, emulate Bill Campbell. And even though he was a rough and tumble football coach, he led with love. He loved everybody that he came in contact with. He hugged everybody he was working with, and everybody felt that he really liked them. He really loved them. And so people really just totally enjoyed, from what I'm reading, they really just loved working with the guy. And so lead with the right kind of ambition. People first, and not with your own self-interest at heart. Number 3, have the ability to achieve a vision. And in order to do that, you should emulate Andy Grove, who is the CEO of Intel. And he references two great books from Andy Grove, High Output Management. Have you read that?
I haven't.
And Only the Paranoid Survive. Either one of those?
Not yet.
So I haven't either, but I made a note of those. And apparently Andy Grove was really great at management and execution, and very particular about making sure things got done a certain way. Nice. So I'd like to read those 2 books to find out more about Andy Grove. Nice. And so those are the 7 takeaways I took from this book, and nice. I love the discussion that we had about that. Thank you guys very much.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about cash flow, or do you want to wrap it up?
No, go ahead. Whatever you want to add.
Well, so I think like with LoudCloud, you know, there's this description in the book of basically like they're flush with venture capital, you know, and so it's like, all right, well, great. Like, what would you do if you could spend this amount of money? And that's a super dangerous question to, you know, this is Brooks' paraphrase, but this is a super dangerous thing to say to an engineer of like, what would you do if you had all this money? And, you know, they basically do that. And so even though they had great technology, they had a great solution, you know, they didn't watch that cash flow enough. And he talks about this, of like, our bookings were awesome. You know, we had amazing bookings, but the way that the revenues actually realized, you can't count it just because you booked the business and you signed the contract. Yeah. You got to see the money come in. And so like, I think that was one of the things that really just led to the downfall of LoudCloud, of, you know, they extended themselves beyond what their cash flow would support, you know, with this sort of like best case scenario we're going to be able to do this. But then as soon as they started falling off that best case scenario, they just didn't have the cash flow. And that, you talked about this several times. They had to go back and get more cash. They had to get more cash.
Yeah. They were running too hot.
They were running too hot. And so I think that's one of the things, having the vision, having it narrow, starting kind of with your customers, minding your cash, making sure that you have cash to continue sustaining operations
When times get tough.
That's right.
Because the U.S. economy is a cyclic economy.
Yeah.
There's going to be highs and lows all the time, forever.
Yeah. Thank you for being
Thanks
here.
a lot.
This
Yeah,
is great.
thanks for having me.
Good luck on your adventure starting
Thank you.
tomorrow.
See you Friday.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, this was The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, and it's a really great book, especially if you are an aspiring business leader or CEO. It's got a lot of great tips and good history of the internet there and some of the technologies